Hello, and welcome to Building Influence. My name is Rowena Moraes. We have another episode of Season 1, which is a deep dive into education. It's a collection of 10 stimulating interviews with creators, leaders, and SME entrepreneurs from around the world who have achieved considerable success in their area of expertise. Now, these interviews bring together the best strategies, tools, and tips that they have found to be most effective in building influence and achieving the goals that drive them. This show is for anyone who's busy crafting and creating to realize their vision. It is designed for people striving to come up with products, services, and teams. We never stop learning. We learn by doing and experimenting and risk taking, and we learn from the missteps and failures of others. So, this is the place for you to discover new ideas that will keep you motivated and strengthened by what you're working to achieve. Building influence is unique in that it looks primarily at how individuals, as creators and leaders and business owners, have had a significant impact by what they did and how they went about doing it. And the show examines three aspects of influence: their profile, their network, and their body of work. And the focus on the small to mid sized business segment reminds us that anyone can transform their dreams into reality. Although we offer no silver bullets, the lessons drawn from the experience of these guests can help you avoid years of wasted effort and frustration. And the bite sized learning enables us to start implementing these ideas immediately. My guest today is Sean Bellamy. Sean is a Varkey Teaching Ambassador, an Ashoka Change Leader, and the founder of SANS School. Sean, thank you for agreeing to come on the show.
Thank you, Rowena.
All right, so let's go straight into the first section, which is really about your profile. I'd like you to share with us your career journey. How much of it was deliberate and how much of it involved moving with the flow? I guess what I'm asking is, are you currently where you intended to be?
Most definitely not, 100% not. It started with ghost stories and a remote coastal village and tragedies and just not knowing, because I'm 36 years into my teaching career, and it started really as an act of luck that I realized that I was good at communication. I didn't really know what to do post-university. I'd been at Cambridge. I was precociously intelligent as a young grammar school boy, horrendously bright, but actually didn't really know how to learn, which is interesting contradiction. But often when you're heavily schooled, you don't actually know what learning is. And at university, I realized that one of the things I could do, because I wasn't actually very good at even finding the library for the first 3 months, what I realized was I was good at communication. And so in my mind began to form this idea that maybe teaching would be a possibility. I went into what in England is called a PGCE, which is a postgraduate certificate of education, not really being sure what to do. And actually through various acts of laziness, finished up stumbling into a beautiful progressive school, because my particular way of being as a person, which was very relational, didn't really match the English education system. So my tutor said, I think I've found the perfect place for you. He found my first job because I was really clear in the way I was in the world about who I was as a person. And he very cleverly matched me with a job. And it started with ghost stories. I didn't know even if I liked kids. I liked the idea of transmitting the things I love, which is I'm an archaeologist, I'm a historian, I'm a psychologist. I love that idea of transmitting those things, but I didn't realize there were children at the other end. Yeah. But when I found myself on a residential for a week, and I was there 24/7 with these teenagers, and we began to meet them in the evening and have breakfast with them, I realized something really strange. I really like kids.
Okay.
And that was the foundation of my job, was actually I really, really love being with children, and I love all aspects, cooking with them, telling stories as well as the work. And that was really an act of luck.
And so if you have viewers now, they're looking at you. What would you like them to know about you from a professional standpoint?
Okay, so thank goodness I'm not a brain surgeon. Yeah, because brain surgeons have to do it right every day. And actually speaking, as a professional teacher, there are days when you're a genius and there are days when you're utterly rubbish. And it doesn't matter, after 36 years, you still have bad days. So professionally, it's actually about endless improvement and realizing that the act of teaching is like a wonderful synergy of three things. And what some people say is it's like three capitals. Yeah, three things you develop in the bank. One is your informational capital, what you know. And I know my disciplines really well. And then there's your cultural capital, understanding the place you're in, the school you're in. Well, I designed this school, a group of children in a garden 33 years ago. I know the place I'm working in. My informational capital and my cultural capital are strong. And then you have your personal capital, who you are as a person, your emotional energies, the way you relate to people. And as a teacher, wherever you are, whatever setting, whether you're a school leader or whether you're starting teaching for the first time, some days those three reach a magic synergy when your cultural, informational, personal capital all meet together so that the person you are in the classroom or working with your team reach some sort of perfection, but you can't sustain it because all those things are related to the people around you and the fluctuation in all those things. I can hold my informational capital well until I become senile. I can hold my cultural capital well until I change the place I work or it changes around me. And I can manage to be a vibrant, vital teacher in the room while those energies remain strong and I remain mindful. So the beautiful thing is it's a constantly shifting feast. So as a professional, it remains permanently exciting to be that person who wakes up not knowing what that synergy will be.
Can you elaborate on a particular tactic that has enhanced the visibility of your professional skills and your expertise?
Yeah. So one of the things that I've realized as I've worked through these 33 years is that the most important thing is relationship. The work sort of matters, yeah, but it only works if it's in communion with other people. And so the work that I do best is the work where I extend the idea and the story of what I'm trying to do into various networks. And the places where the relationship is strongest is the place where my profile and my visibility is best, because there I can be the person I am. So those places which allow one to feel fully comfortable in who you are. And I'm not sure I think you might have to, maybe rephrase the question or we could ask it again, but that's intuitively what comes to me. But maybe that's
No, that's fine. That's good. So I was going to say the follow-up question was in relation to, has this largely taken place face to face more than digitally then?
the weird thing about lockdown is that it multiplied the range of work I was doing exponentially. Before that, my work had been primarily face-to-face in schools, or I would travel. I would travel to work with the Varkey Foundation, with the Ashoka Foundation through Europe, through the world, as far as South Korea, Australia. I was working everywhere, but obviously at the speed of that sort of travel.
Mm-hmm.
In lockdown, I think because I was feeling a profound loss of that sort of connection, I then reached out and got involved in, at one stage, 21 international projects. That all became at a completely different speed, to a speed at which wasn't sustainable, because we could meet together in multiple time zones in Zoom and begin to progress our work at an enormous speed, which normally would have to go at the speed of when can we meet physically. And I reached a point actually where my work was so diverse and so demanding that I wasn't even sure I would be able to sustain it. So the Zoom platform and these digital platforms are amazing. I sort of was able to prove to myself that they're an amazing medium for the multiplication of effort, and also not just meeting, but making things happen. But to a frightening extent, where I actually thought that I would actually break.
Tell us a little bit about that.
So at one point, with the 21 projects on the go in all the time zones, then I would be waking up, leaping on a call like we are now when we're 12 hours apart, leaping on that, doing this work, jumping into school on Zoom for 4 or 5 hours, and then having 3 or 4 back-to-back conversations in different parts of the world, all because it mattered. But actually also what mattered was communion with other people. And I think what Zoom does, it's like the, the pandemic created what someone called beautifully the covoid. COVID is the covoid, that it creates some sort of gap in our relationship physically. So I was beginning to fill it with virtual relationships.
Yes.
But by the nature of where they are across the planet, they were 18 to 20 hours a day. And I was seduced into doing it because both my ego was fed by the interest and by the work and my desire to make a difference, but also it becomes almost impossible to stop because you all become self-reliant upon each other for sustaining this work. Actually, at a point where I sat and I realized that I had to prioritize down to the projects which would best feed me and also the ones that I could sustain. So I reduced it down to 6. Yeah.
Wow.
And
Okay.
yeah. And one of those projects has to be your own family. The most important is the relationships closest. That's not something that's separate, although it may seem weird. You know, you need to prioritize what feeds you most. And then my school. And then I was left with 4 things that I could put my energies into. And now I feel as if I'm not in the wall of this tornado. I feel I'm standing in the eye of the storm now. 6 months ago, I was going around at 300 miles an hour in a tornado. And I thought I was being clever.
Hmm. I guess we're all learning as we move, and these are, unique times. We don't have any precedents, I guess, to look towards, right?
Maybe there's one other thing, Rowena, which is that when you work on these multiple projects, what you're also doing is actually establishing your future career.
Hmm.
So every time you have a contact, might be the thing you move into. So you're also seduced by the idea of this work with this particular foundation might be my next job. So you're
Yes.
also going out there selling yourself.
Hmm.
So there's when you've got these multiple purposes behind your relationships, it's also important to recognize that. And I recognize it in myself. Am I going to be at SANS? I've been here for 33 years. Am I going to be 75 years old? In 15 years, I'll be 75. Am I going to be there as the longest standing teacher in the world who stayed in one place, 45 years in one place? Or am I going to move on and make a difference somewhere else? And if I'm going to do that, all these jobs, all these connections are potential jobs for the future, which also means you get pulled into them in actually quite a toxic way.
Mm. So, if you were to define yourself, because you've got so many things that you're working on and multiple projects that are, leveraging different skills, what would you say is, what would you like to be known for then?
In Korea, I'm known as the barefoot teacher. Um,
Okay.
I went to Korea to do this work with them about student well-being, which is what matters hugely to me. Student voice. But really what that means is helping adults listen, because if you've got a voice, it doesn't work if no one's listening. So to give young people the powers of oracy, to be able to communicate what's happening inside them, encourage adults to really listen. So I was asked to go to Korea to work with the Ministry of Education. So I went out there thinking, I'm an ambassador for my quirky little school. There are only 75 children in my school, and yet it has this influence globally. So I needed to go there. So I went over to South Korea, and the first evening, when there was the Ministry of Education and Minister of Youth Health, which they have, which is wonderful. They have a Minister of Youth Health. That's how awful their self-harm and suicide and school refusal crisis is, that they need a minister for it. And in any country, if you have a minister for anything, then that's where you've got a problem. Yeah. So we sat for the first evening, having a meal, and my feet were hot. So I take my shoes off and my socks off under the table. And then they say, Sean, would you come and introduce yourself? So I think, well, I haven't got time to put my shoes on. I'll just go and stand up. So I'm there with my suit on with no shoes. explaining what SANS is and how passionate I am about supporting young people's well-being, and that in the Korean system where these children do 18-hour days and they break themselves on the wheel of going to university, literally 18-hour days. In England, we have pub lock-ins. What happens is you get to the pub at 7 and at 11, they lock the door so you can carry on so the police don't get you because you're not allowed to stay open that long. In Korea, the Hagwon, the tutorial colleges, lock children in at 10 o'clock so they can carry on working till midnight. And the children agree because the idea is only the top 1% get to the best university places. So everyone's chasing these qualifications. So I'm there with this horrendous crisis of well-being for young people. And I'm standing with my bare feet, and I sit down next to the Minister of Education after I've done my 10-minute spiel. And he said, Sean, why have you got no shoes on? And I said, well, my feet were hot. And he said, that's such a good idea. I would never think of that. And like, because it's about conformity. And I stood there without my shoes on saying, I'm not going to conform. What you get is my mind and my passion. You don't have to have me, someone who's going to wear a suit and wear my shoes. And at the end of the week, they took me to a shoe market to buy me some shoes as a joke, which was like really lovely. They got the joke. But so I think the idea of what you need to do if you're going to develop a profile in this world, is to have something that makes you stand out, that's genuine and authentic to you. And I needed to represent SANS, which is alternative and quirky and brave about your self-identity. So Barefoot Teacher would work perfectly. And I did that when I stood in front of 4,000 teachers. I took my shoes off deliberately in front of them before I went up on stage, and they just stared at my feet the whole time.
You got the attention.
They remembered me.
Yes.
So how are you going to draw attention to yourself in a way which isn't just entertaining? What it is a genuine reflection of what you're trying to do.
Great point. So, okay, maybe you can share with us, in terms of building your digital presence, what has been key to helping you build a strong presence and profile?
Yeah. So I had lots of frustration about lots of the platforms I was trying to use.
Okay,
Lots.
such as what were you using?
I'll share. So I use Facebook, I use emails, I use WhatsApp, I use LinkedIn a lot. And what I realized was that they can be used in different ways if you're going to try and develop your profile and communication. They're not all doing the same thing. One of the things, when I work with the Varkey Foundation, which has 500, well, probably 350 to 500 teachers present on that, you then have to think, what's happening when we communicate? By the time, and this is similar to Facebook, by the time I've put up an idea, it's disappeared behind 50 new ideas because it's a horizontal platform. So you can't create dialogue very easily on WhatsApp. What it becomes is a sort of talking shop for people's achievements. You can't develop a proper dialogue. So you have to then set up a unique group away from it, which works horizontally, because vertical platforms, you get lost really quickly, particularly if they're heavily populated. And I realized that if I wanted to develop a narrative, rather than just constantly ping it with little tidbits, you have to then generate a conversation in a different way. And something like email, weirdly, works really well to keep a conversation going, or Zoom, that you then set up an independent personal group face-to-face, where there are 9 people on screen, because the WhatsApp and the Facebook, you'll disappear if you're trying to tell the story. So you have to be a bit bright about it. And then you have to learn how to use these platforms. You have to look for their weaknesses and their strengths. So Zoom is brilliant, but Zoom is also bad if you've got beyond, let's say, 24 people, because they go onto 2 screens. And then you have to learn how to flip between screens and then learn to read body language and facial characteristics and all those things. So the thing that's helped me develop my profile is to use the various platforms that suits the platform, not try and use it against its will. So I use WhatsApp in order to gather a group, in order to take them somewhere else to work with them. I use Facebook really to tell stories, not about myself, because people tend to use Facebook, particularly in WhatsApp, to go how proud they are of. We talked about this last time, how proud I am of my daughter for graduating. Just tell your child. If you're trying to tell everyone, every communication that you make anywhere on a digital platform, you're trying to tell your story. You may not know it, but what you're trying to do is tell everyone else who you are. So be really cautious of what you put out there. So I tend to represent the children. I tend to represent the story and not myself. So I don't post certificates of what I've done. I don't tell people the things I'm proud of about myself, and make sure the story, the body of the work does the work. That's sustainable. And then use the platforms appropriate to what they offer you. So WhatsApp, work individually in smaller groups, and email has still been one of the best ways. And LinkedIn actually is very good. It does work as a way of, it says, this is about my professional profile. I'm allowed to talk about my professional profile because that's what it says on the tin. And therefore do what it says on the tin.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Okay. So that's very true what you said about vertical and horizontal platforms. You're right. And that's partly why we've got a bit of an attention deficit, is we're just constantly bombarded, and we need to hit the refresh button and just see what's always the latest. And we can't necessarily develop long lasting, relationships or conversations when we are doing that all the time. So I'm glad to hear that you are aware of and finding ways to use the platforms in a way that supports you, rather than just, this is what I have and I have to just work with this. So that's great. How do you market yourself? Do you have anything that you can share about how you're putting yourself out there?
So as I said just previously, I try
Yes.
really not to make this a story about myself.
Okay.
I think that this idea of people, what they want to do often in a world of social media, in which we're bombarded by the idea of this word fame, which is, I think, quite toxic. People think that their work can be developed because they're famous. Now, it is true that there are people who are already famous who can use their work and their words to influence the world in a really good way. But seeking fame in order to do that can be really toxic. My experience working with various foundations is that when people do that and they try and tell the story of themselves all the time, it actually casts a shadow on other people. And I think we feel it. People feel this because the social media has exposed us this idea of we're in the shadow of people who are more successful, wealthier, more beautiful. So I don't want to be in that world. I want to be in the world where we celebrate the work of others and we celebrate the story of the work. So what I do is that the way I market myself is purely through the story of my work and celebrating the story of the transformation of children and maybe the transformation of my colleagues, but modeling that as a moral way forward, because I think we need to work on these platforms with a moral compass. You have to decide before you get on any of these platforms who you want the world to know you are, and you need to be consistent and have integrity with that. And if it's that you want to show them that you're a kind human, if that's what it is, then your communication should reflect that, and the way you work on the planet should reflect it. So I try and base my profile upon my moral compass, but I'm not actually interested whether I die famous at all. I don't care. But I do care about children being heard and intergenerational work. And so I do everything I can to reflect that in my own practice.
I think it's a really timely reminder about the shadow, the fame, and how it casts a shadow on others. I mean, you mentioned it the other day in our chat, so I'm glad that you've talked about it here as well. Okay, let's move into a discussion about your network. What I'd like to find out are perhaps 2 or 3 key aspects of networking that you feel are important.
Yeah.
And if you can keep in mind as well, the fact that maybe some of them, some of the people who might be watching are new to networking and could use some tips.
Yeah, I was thinking about that, Rowena, because I did a little bit of, I lay in bed this morning because it's 9 o'clock in the morning here, and I thought I need to just, what I tend to do is try and work with my intuition. And I think intuition really is what it is a combination of all your experience, and then the computer part of the brain takes your experience, and then what you find is wisdom that comes out, but it's maybe not something you've thought about before. So I like this idea of just before an event, just seeing what comes up. And this is what came up for me in terms of networking. We have 5 forms of networking. We have networks of collaboration, networks of support, networks of challenge, networks of infiltration, or let's call them guerrilla networks, and then the network, which is the supermarket shelf. And so I've realized that in the work I do, the networks I'm part of, some of them are collaboration for projects, which is beautiful. Some of them are made up of people, which might be part of this collaboration, but where we mutually support each other, where we talk and we help each other deal with the challenges of our own systems. So there might be people across the planet, but we meet fortnightly or weekly, and we share what it is to be leaders in this way, and we look after each other. Then we have those networks where I meet, where I'm stretched and I'm challenged and I feel like I'm growing, and I deliberately put myself into those environments where the things that I need to know, or I want someone to put me on the spot and challenge my thinking. Again, it could be the same. This could be the same network, but these are the jobs they do. And then you have joining a network where you want to infiltrate and bring your idea to something. So I could go and work inside the business world and bring the concepts of communication we develop as teachers into that world. I could infiltrate a network. And then finally, we've got the networks where you want to put yourself on the supermarket shelf to be found. So if I think about the Varkey Foundation with 350 teachers, they have communication over thousands of other networks. So if I put myself there, I get found. I just need to make sure that my brand, my particular form of washing powder is what it says. Mine's Ecova, mine's ecological organic, and sometimes it doesn't work very well, but your clothes smell nice. And I need to know that I'm found because I want to make a difference. So I think we could think of networks, search for the networks that do those things, particularly the ones that support you in your practice, where you feel nurtured. And I have 3 major networks I'm part of, and some of them play all those roles. And some I specifically join because I know I'm going to be a guerrilla inside them, doing my small war to make a difference, because I need to infiltrate, let's say, the modern education system in the UK. So I make myself part of the network of head teachers across the UK, most of whom I think have no idea about children, but I get in there to do my guerrilla work.
Great way of putting it. Can you share 2 things that you've done to 2 tactics perhaps to grow your network?
Yeah. Well, the first thing is perhaps a mistake to try and grow them too fast.
Say again?
Yeah. It's a mistake to try and grow them too fast.
Okay.
Yeah.
Did you do that?
In that period this year when I was just spreading myself too thin, it doesn't work. But it's a function of the ego. And I think we need to look at our egos a lot about why we're doing something. So that's not really a positive. That's about be cautious at the speed, because they work best if there's strong relationship within those networks, and it takes time to develop them, because then you might find that all the things that you were hoping to gain from the multiple networks come from 1 or 2, but they serve all those functions because those people are super talented and they themselves are part of other networks. So it's a little bit like dropping a stone into the water. If you climb high enough, even a pebble makes some pretty big ripples. You don't need to throw 50 into the water, nor do you have to have something that's ultimately massive, particularly if you can't lift it high enough to make a difference. So that's one thing, that you need to think about the conflict between ego and the function of your network. So for me, it's about really searching for what it does, and does it serve the purpose I want to do? and the relationship first, and then thinking about those various functions: collaboration, support, challenge. And yeah, so I think that's been really interesting for me to think about. Firstly, why am I doing it? Why am I part of it? And when I say to myself, will you let your ego have a conversation here with yourself? You can put quite a lot of them down, because it's actually just about being seduced by the idea of being part of something. And I ask myself whether I can bring anything to it. And sometimes I can't bring something to it, but I know that being part of it is going to improve my practice.
You can't bring something to it, you mean to the network?
Yeah, sometimes. Yeah, or someone's there already doing it better than I can. And therefore,
I think it's a tough one. It's a challenging one, because if you look like at a platform like LinkedIn, for example, where, you know, everyone is busy growing their network, everyone's busy putting themselves out there, saying things. Some of these posts are vain, you know, it's vanity stuff, and some of it is to truly help others. But a lot of building influence is about building the network, because if you don't have the network, if you don't have the audience, then you can't shine a light on your work and you can't get the visibility you need. So at some point you do need to build the numbers as well. But I totally get the point about, if you've got the size but all you're after is the numbers, then you won't get that interaction and you won't get that alignment and, you know, resonance.
that's true.
And
true. And I think
that's
yeah,
hard.
Yeah, there's a moment for me around about 11 years ago. I had a liver transplant. I had a strange autoimmune condition, which relatively rare. And so I had to have a liver transplant. And that was 11 years ago. So I was really poorly running up to that. And after that, it was, you can imagine, a bit of an epiphany to think you might die, and then you come out the other side. And at that moment, I was prepared to take risks that I wasn't prepared to take before. There's a moment sometimes where you realize that I could have spent this last 11 years just in SANS, working with this beautiful group of children, with my wonderful colleagues, and making my difference in terms of each child who leaves the school becomes an ambassador for what we offer. So they become my voice, because the work we do with them, they leave our school compassionate, empathic, creative young people. That was one way to do it. And that's true for anyone who's listening. It could be that the people you work with become your voice if you work with them well. But I decided that the story was important enough, and that the planet was in a place where we needed to accelerate the rate of change. And if we don't accelerate the rate of change in terms of our empathy and connection to wildlife and to nature and to each other, unless we challenge issues around intolerance, lack of connectivity, we don't look at interbeing, how we see ourselves connected to everything, then we're moving rapidly towards catastrophe. And so for me, that was a personal moment of motivation to tell my story more powerfully and be prepared to take the risk to put myself on these multiple networks. So I think we need to ask ourselves, what's our deep motivation? And when we realize it's not the ego and it's not vanity, it's about sharing a beautiful story we know will make a difference. It's much easier to go out there and sell yourself, because you're not selling yourself. What you're doing, you know, you're making a generous effort with personal sacrifice to make sure the story is multiplied.
True. Okay, so in terms of the people that you consider your tribe, your network, what are some of the criteria for deciding on who should form part of your tribe? What kind of decisions do you make about who you want to connect with?
It's really interesting. No, quite a lot of that is down to luck, isn't it? And fate and synchronicity. And I find that synchronicity has a really powerful part to play. And I talked about this idea about being in the eye of the storm. So something about your personal practice where you know that you're centered. Now, it's really strange for me when I do that daily. So I have a daily practice, which is something called Qigong, or while swimming I do as well, When I've done that and I feel centered, it's fascinating how many moments of synchronicity happen where you're thinking about a particular project you want to develop and you get that communication, that email comes in. So some of it is just about trusting instinct and intuition. And it may sound, sort of like that doesn't sound very functional or practical, but being prepared to be fully present and then tune into what's happening around you, I think you're more alert to possibility.
Oh, for
Maybe
sure.
and you're
For
looking
sure.
for the moments when the email comes in and you're actually physically putting out, you're trying to manifest. I wonder what would happen if I put out this ask to the universe, send a ripple out, send a wave out and see what comes back. So very, very many of my contacts, even though we're using the science of light speed communication with things like Zoom and emails, actually the relationships I have which have been sustained within my practice have come from a place which sounds esoteric rather than scientific. And I think that's really worth thinking about, that don't make everything functional and scientific. Be prepared to allow the heart to have an equal part as the brain. The relationship that develops from that is going to be one that's going to sustain you and be potentially more deeply creative. So my tribe is made up of people that I've stumbled across in a beautiful way. And then there's an intentionality you need as well. So when I gather a team of teachers around me to work with the school, those teachers are selected by the children and the staff together.
Okay.
Yeah. So, and they have to spend a week in the school. What we do is we are intentionally looking for people who align with our principles. And again, that makes your work sustainable. And our experience has been that people who don't align become an enormous draw on our energy. And we want to apply our energy to the beautiful work rather into mediation and endless conflict resolution.
Of course. It's intriguing you mentioned the Qigong just now as a key part of this. Somehow you feel that the practice of being centered and aligned creates that openness. Is that what you're saying?
I think I do it every morning before I walk into school because I want to go in and I want to be alert to this thing. What's the real name of the people in front of me? Now, Ursula Le Guin, beautiful author, she's an anthropologist. She wrote about the act of magic. And she talked about magic is this: the only way you can transform a flower into a stone or a stone into a flower is to know the real name of both. So if I want to be as an educator in the act of transformation, which is what education is, I need to know the real name of the children in front of me. I need to know the real name of my colleagues. And that real name is who they are, really who they are, not just their surname and their Christian name. And in order to be present sufficiently that you are able to receive the information about who they really are in front of you, you need to be properly centered. And then you walk into any situation, be it on a Zoom call, centered, and you know the real name of the person in front of you. You feel it and you search for it. You ask questions and you remain inquisitive about the people in front of you. And often the children will leave a lesson saying, that was a really interesting lesson, Sean. And all I've done is ask them questions. It's the person who asked the best questions who's the most interesting person in the room. It isn't the one who tells the most interesting story. And I think that's how we use this practice of meditation or Qigong or while swimming or whatever it is, your badminton, to walk in and to be fully present to the real name of the people in front of you. And then it works because you're teaching them. You're not teaching characters.
Yeah, I love how it's defined in that way because, we're thinking it, but by being able to call it, who is that person? What is the name of that person? It's interesting, very interesting. And it resonates and can stick longer as well. Really love that.
Tolkien talked about, there are these strange creatures in Lord of the Rings book called Ents, and Ents have this incredibly elaborate, long-winded language because they're trees, They're tree herders that live pretty much forever. And so they don't have to rush. And there's a moment when these young human-like creatures have been with them for about 6 hours. And then they're having a meeting, and the Ents come back to these young humans, and they say, and the young humans are going, okay, what have we decided? And they said, no, we've just introduced ourselves. Yeah. Because then you know who's there.
Yes.
And their language is like rolling thunder and flowing water. And if we imagine that we can take the time to know the people in front of us, our work works.
Absolutely. Absolutely. One last question before we move into your body of work. Are there any consistent elements in your outreach effort?
Yeah. I think no matter what I do, there's when I talk about, the reason we do our work, you have to have a sort of purpose inside your heart about what's driving you. And for me, it's about trying to allow the generations to realize that the generation below them, the younger people, have got this wisdom that education isn't an act of filling up, it's an act of waking up. Now, if you believe education is about filling children up till they reach a certain point when they're fully grown up, then they're always less. They're always less than the older person because they haven't been filled up enough. The vessel isn't full to the top. Whereas my understanding has been, and my experience has been, that a 3-year-old is amazingly wise for a 3-year-old. And if you allow a 9-year-old to be a brilliant 9-year-old, they're incredibly wise. They don't know about nuclear physics, but they know about their world. And so the purpose is to encourage more people to look for the wisdom in young people. And the way we do that is work with voice and listening and choice. And that drives my purpose in multiple dimensions. It's really all about that, because when you give young people a true voice and we create cultures of listening, we reduce stress. We finish up finding an antidote to depression, because powerlessness is one of the things that makes us feel most depressed and sad on the planet. And suicide rates on Native American reservations are incredibly high for young people. And they say, when you ask them, and I've been to these reservations in North America, when you ask them, they say, we have no identity, nobody listens, we have no purpose, and we don't recognize our culture anymore. And my role has been, as an educator, to create schools where they're not school cultures, they're cultures where young people can actually really explore who they are, their identity and their purpose. Often young people are only allowed to be characters behaving like pupils. They can't be themselves. You can't be Rowena. You have to be the well-behaved, or poorly behaved child. That's just the character. So that you can't explore your identity in a deep way. So you need to, I think I would ask people listening and watching to think about what's the deep purpose in what you do. And if it resonates, if it has what's called the felt thought, that when you say it, it moves you, then you'll be able to sustain your work. When you say it and you realize it's just words, you'll also feel it. And it would be really difficult to sustain the challenge and the sacrifice to make a difference.
That's a wonderful perspective. Okay, we've got another 10 to 12 minutes, and I'd like to use this time to do a little bit more of a deep dive into your body of work. So what do you consider to be your unique strengths or your areas of expertise?
So the thing that I discovered when I was in a library in Cambridge, studying archaeology very badly, using books as pillows because they're brilliant. If you get them stacked high enough, they make brilliant pillows. Yeah, honestly. I realized then that communicating in a way which connects my heart and my brain so that it resonates with truth and it has an emotional vibration, that I realized from a very, very early stage in my life, that even probably younger than that, that I was able to use words to disseminate what was actually happening inside my body rather than what was happening inside my brain. My brain was just in control of the flow and the eloquence. So that was emotional communication in a way which is genuine and honest, I think, has been the thing which, when children walk into a classroom or when people work with me, they realize that I'm brave enough to say what's happening inside me.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, not just what's going on in my head, because we feel things in our body and we interpret them in our head. So what I try and do is allow those two parts to communicate well together. So the feeling is just being interpreted into words which others can understand. That's the job of my brain. The job of my body is to feel it. So that's one thing. And I think a real affection for young people is I'm really genuinely fascinated by them and love hanging out with them. I was walking past a classroom, and I was in New York. I was walking past the classroom, and someone came out and said, "They don't teach me enough. They don't pay me enough to teach those kids." Right? Mm-hmm. And I was like, "Oh my God." And I asked, "Do you like them?" And she said, "I'm not paid to like them." And I said, "They won't learn from you unless you like them." Yeah, I'm not paid enough. I'm not paid to like them. And that, for me, was such an anathema, because actually the reason I'm a teacher, I realized when I was doing that residential, the reason I'm a teacher is because, first and foremost, I love being with young people, and I love the opportunity to do that act of transformation and to be with them, to be entertained by them and to entertain them. I love it. That's what drives it, not a desire to transmit psychology per se. Everything I teach is a medium for transformation and self-awareness and waking up. And I think if that's the driving force, you can carry on. I don't have to worry about becoming a grey-haired teacher, because as long as I love being with kids, they'll know it. So yeah.
Yeah. Well, what is her real name?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
I was thinking about, there's a great line in Scooby-Doo, which is, "If it wasn't for those pesky kids." And that's what a load of teachers walk out of their classrooms thinking. If it hadn't been for those pesky kids, my lesson would have been brilliant. Mm. And teach to an empty room.
Yes.
Because the reason you're teaching is you're bringing that information and those ideas to a group of characters. Teach them in such a way. Don't come out and say, if it hadn't been for those pesky kids, that would have been a better lesson. The lesson was for the children, not at them.
Yeah. Can you talk a little bit about the discovery of your strengths? How you began to, how it came to light, how you began to nurture it. Can you share maybe a story?
Yeah. I tell ghost stories on school camps.
Okay.
Yeah. And they're become really very famous in the school's history.
Okay.
Because, and the deal is this, we go on school camp and everyone knows by about night 3, Sean's going to start telling ghost stories around the campfire.
Are these your own? You make
These
them
are
up?
I make them up. And they're based on elaborate combinations of things that have happened to me and things that children tell me. And they know the general idea is that I'm going to go around camp and I'm going to find out in the first 3 days what freaks people out, right? What are you really scared of? And they think, great, I'll tell Sean I'm really scared of clowns because he's going to put clowns in the ghost story. And the reason I share this is because I get really nervous about the responsibility of holding, sometimes for 3 hours around a campfire from 10 to 1 in the morning. It's Sean's time to tell ghost stories. And the ghost story will be like, tell me 7 things that you're frightened of, and I'll make a ghost story up right now, right? And it'll be a ghost story. I don't even know what it is. I'm just going to send out a message to the universe, and we're going to have a ghost story together. And it's going to involve you, and I'm going to ask you a contribution. And it's there that it's in those times when I test my skill. And it's something you've got to permanently hone. Things like, I'm thinking to myself, if I want to say or don't, pause. Don't use those small words or those little ticks which irritate children. When a teacher has a tick, they constantly say a certain thing. So I'm constantly honing my communication skills. So there aren't any ums and ers and pauses like that. The pause is just done in a way which is meant to create a smoothness of the story to hold my audience. So I permanently work on my intention to be a smooth and passionate communicator. So yeah, that's on the ghost stories. I hone it, and I'm absolutely petrified that I have lost it. I'm thinking, oh my God, I'm on my 34th camp. Will I have lost it? So I think be brave enough to take yourself right to the edge of what you think your skill is and keep honing it and keep working on it in the most dangerous situations, because it could be, I sit in my tent and think, oh my God, I can't do this anymore. Be brave.
Yeah.
And there'll be a time when I think it's enough. I don't want to do this anymore. But I still like the idea of holding that audience around a campfire and having to work with all the things I've developed over 33 years and then get in the flow.
Putting
Because
it
this
into
is,
there.
yeah, and I think that's for all of us, is that we reach a state of flow when we know we've got a synergy between the brain, the heart, the mind, the body, all flows.
Yes.
Practice makes that happen more often. Roger Federer would tell you it's practice which means he sits in the flow more often. Same for all of us, whatever we do,
Yeah.
find the flow through endless practice.
And I'm sure they're all riveted.
Yeah,
The
I'm
kids.
riveted. I don't know what's coming up. Thinking, oh my God, I used to frighten myself.
Oh my
I think,
goodness.
no, I used to frighten myself. We'd go to places and we'd been in, old dark houses and we'd turn the lights off and we'd play murder in the dark. And then I'd tell ghost stories. And I struggle to go to sleep because it feels like you've summoned the spirit world.
Oh
Yeah.
gosh.
Um,
Right at the bleeding edge.
yeah, right, exactly. Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah. And kids love it because, kids love risk. They
yeah.
love risk. It's got to be nurtured so that it's not so dangerous, but they love to be right on the edge of fear.
But it's not just that. I also feel that, just having listened to you for coming up to an hour, I feel that you just pour yourself completely into that entire activity. You're immersed, and being so immersed and taking it so seriously, just being so present.
Mm,
They are therefore then present with you. They are, you've opened up a portal, so to speak. You've created this environment and the situation, and you've welcomed them in, and they are like, yep,
yeah,
I'm there with you. So,
yeah, yeah.
it's
It's an
a,
act of courage, Rowena. It's an act of courage and an act of trust. You need to have faith that what you're sharing is coming from a place of love
yeah,
and is well informed, of course. And I think that's an act of courage to trust the planet, that it's full of beautiful people who just want to be involved in something interesting and real. And if you believe that, then you put yourself out there in a courageous way. And I'm not necessarily a very brave person in that way. I don't like conflict, but I have the courage to put myself out there. The world is full of our friends yet to be. And if you put yourself out there in that way.
okay. Well, that's why I want to come to this point about stumbling blocks. In your lifetime, doing all the things that you've done, you would have come across, a number of stumbling blocks in building your expertise. And I'd like you to maybe share a story about a stumbling block and how you might have overcome it.
Yeah. Well, so let's go back to this idea about courage and bravery.
Mm-hmm.
So I faced things as a brave person, like liver transplant and other surgeries.
Yeah.
But that's a sort of physical bravery.
Mm-hmm.
Emotional bravery is different. And as a leader, you have to have courage. It has to be tempered by compassion and wisdom. But you have to have courage. And what I discovered as a leader is that I'm not courageous in terms of going out and confronting people. Partly because I believe that I don't want to be responsible for that person's change of behavior, because I believe we're responsible for our own behavior. And if I then go and say to someone, this needs to change, I'm then for the rest of my life responsible for that act. Whereas if I walk into a situation where there's conflict, I'm really good at mediating that.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it's really important when we think of ourselves as edupreneurs or leaders in our way, or coming into the world, hoping to be able to lead and change, to look at what our courage is and to accept its strengths and weaknesses. And therefore I constantly have to face this. Am I going to walk in and find a way to confront a child or a colleague in a way which I know is going to be hard for them? And I have to take a breath to go in there. And actually it's quite good, because it means you walk in gentle. And that's an endless job. It's a bit like, I don't know the difference between effect and affect still. For some reason, I never learned it. And it's a bit like, doesn't matter how many times people tell me, every day I wake up and have to remember the difference between effect and affect. And you could tell me now, but Sean, this is the trick. And I'll go, that's a brilliant trick, Rowena, and I'll forget it tomorrow. And it's like that with courage. I have to wake up each morning and know that this is an area where there is a fundamental weakness in my practice. And I don't mean it in a way to beat myself up. So I walk into the school knowing that this is something I wake up and have to reinvent in myself each day. And if we all look at those bits within ourselves, we know there's like a flaw that runs through. The Chinese have a beautiful idea. Chinese say that when a pot breaks, they seal the crack with gold. It's like a teapot that's very old, and they seal it with gold. And if we see our flaw as that, my flaw around courage is that piece of gold. And actually, it wakes me up to my fragility as a person, which means when I work with a fragile child, I'm totally empathic because I recognize these things in myself.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Wonderful. Thank you for sharing. So how are you, we're talking about your body of work. We're talking about the things that you're working on. How are you building up that body of work? How are you shining a light? Where does this work sit?
Yeah. Something, Rowena, that what really matters for me is, of course, it matters that we make a difference.
Mm-hmm.
Whether anyone listens to my podcasts, whether they read the stuff I've read, whether it has whether it survives in history. The Greeks talk about we become immortal because people remember us. That matters much less to me than the daily work. Mm-hmm. So for me, it's not a particularly clear way of finishing a beautiful conversation, but it's an area where I still am conflicted. This because of this thing around, I want to make a difference, but I want to make a difference which leaves a gentle imprint on the planet. And I think we all need to walk really gently on the planet, because if we walk too powerfully, sometimes it's like Greta Thunberg, where she walks gently on the planet. She says her truth. She's a beautiful young person. That makes a difference. So I'm trying to always find the balance between putting myself out there as a strong personality, but also allowing others to find their power and come past me. And it's a bit like walking on a beach. I made a promise to a very dear friend who I was coaching. I said, we'll walk on this beach hand in hand together, and our footsteps will walk side by side. But eventually I'm going to stop and you're going to walk ahead of me, and your footprints will be the one in the future. And I'll be an old man and I'll be here and I won't be able to keep up. So there's something for me really beautiful about, I want to pave the way. My work should be a way which opens up the possibilities for others at the same time as trying to make a difference. And that leaves me in a permanent and beautiful tension of projecting my story, but doing it in a way which actually is about creating that act of transformation for others. I still haven't found the magic synergy in that, but the intention's always there, is to walk gently in our work.
You articulate this so beautifully. If somebody were to be building a body of work right now and they're starting, what can you share about the process?
Yeah. So we first you look at this thing we talked about being centered. Try and start each day centered. Yeah. So that that you know that the work you're doing is coming from an intentionality and not the ego. That's really important. Understand the motive, the deep motive behind it, what's driving it. That's the thing that's going to nurture you. Yeah. Otherwise, what will happen is the work will become really, really big, but actually it will be diverse and disparate, and it won't go very far. It'll just look great, but it won't say anything deep.
Mhm.
And find people around you. Be in relationship, be in communion with like-minded people. And I think if you work with those principles and remain a human, that you are deeply flawed as a human, yeah, and no matter what your intention is, you will fail on the way, and enjoy the failure. Totally enjoy it. Failure is just an opportunity to do it again, and your work will be less powerful if you think it has to be right, and that you have to be right as a person. So if you hold those things, you finish up having a really fun time producing your body of work and develop a deep communion with some amazing humans, which is why we're here, I think. And be aware that every act has an effect upon not just the people around you, but the forest and the river and the dolphins. You know, be in a state of interbeing in your work. Don't think this is about humanity. Think everything you say resonates through the universe and has an impact somewhere. This is not just about humanity. We're in a post-humanist phase where we've got to realize that our acts need to influence in a beautiful way the forest, and we need to walk gently through the forest knowing that it's sentient. And I think if you do that in your work as well, you'll also understand that there's a moral framework that runs it, which allows you to be proud of yourself. And pride in yourself is not the same as ego.
Okay, thank you. Just 3 rapid fire questions before we end. 2 habits that you consider essential to your ongoing success.
So practice to remain centered, qigong.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Yeah. And realize you're wrong.
Realize you're wrong.
So for me, walking into a situation believing that I could be wrong.
Okay.
Yeah. It's
Wow.
really important. Otherwise, you create environments.
That's
Yeah.
become a habit for you, that you can
Yeah.
maintain that mindfulness about that.
Yeah.
Wow.
So
Okay.
if I'm with a child, if I'm talking to a child, and the idea is that have they done something wrong? The first thing I ask myself is, what have I done wrong?
Mm-hmm.
What's my responsibility in this? I've probably done something wrong if we're here in conflict.
Wow. Okay. So much to think about. What has been instrumental in helping you overcome fear?
Fear, honestly, fear, actually having to face real fear, like I'm going to die. Twice I thought I was going to die. Now that wasn't our choice. So sometimes it's just fortune that puts you in a situation when you realize that you challenge real fear. So I was about to go into surgery the second time for massive abdominal surgery, and they had the blood pressure monitor on me, and my heart rate was 62 and my blood pressure was normal. And they said, this isn't possible. You should be shitting yourself. And it was like, why? Why? What's going to happen is going to happen. If I'm prepared in this way to accept whatever, and I'm not going to die, it's not even crossing my mind. That is not an option, but nor am I frightened. So what caused that? I don't know. But I think having to face catastrophic fear helps you deal with fear. So you have to put yourself in situations where you're frightened. Don't avoid it. The only brave person on this planet is the person who's frightened. Otherwise, it's not bravery, is it?
Absolutely. Okay, last one, very quickly. What has been the guiding principle that has enabled you to play the long game?
Having really good jokes. Yeah. It's actually, none of it matters that much. Yeah. You've got to balance the fact that you're totally passionate about what you're doing, and none of it matters that much. We are stardust with consciousness. We're just lucky. There were billions of sperm, and one of them was me. And then stardust coalesced into this consciousness. I'm just lucky to be here. So we have to enjoy it and have fun with it. How do you find a balance between that incredible luck to be sentient right now for my years and make a difference, and yet still not be swamped by the importance of the different? you've got to retain a sense of humor about how wonderful it is that we're here.
Absolutely. Sean Bellamy, Varkey Teaching Ambassador, Ashoka Change Leader, and founder of SANS School. Sean, thank you so much for coming on the show, sharing your story, and it's been amazing, and I appreciate the time that you've taken to be part of this. Where can people find you online?
So the best thing to probably do is if you, I think that I've shared my email, which I think is a good start to anyone who wants to communicate with me directly.
Okay.
And you can do that, but
Yep.
Sean at sans-school.co.uk, because clearly Sean and Sans are the same thing, because Sans actually means, the kids said when we're starting the school 33 years ago, what should we call the school? And they said we should call it Sans because it means Sean and Sibylla. And Sibylla was the other co-founder. So you can find me there, 33 years in at Sans. If you look up Sans School, you'll find me.
Okay, excellent. Well, thank you so much, Sean, for doing this today. It was amazing. And we'll keep in touch. And all the best.
Thank you.